Welcome to the Online Trainer Show, where we help fitness and nutrition pros take better care of their clients and build profitable businesses. I'm Jonathan Goodman, and as always, I'm joined by Amber Reynolds. We're happy you're here. Let's start the show. I love this topic.
It takes for me to get used to hearing my name.
Yeah, I know. It's still weird for me to say my own name. I love this. I love this topic. This is one of my favorite topics because I feel like it's one of those topics that I can answer so cleanly that when anybody hears it, they're like, yeah, shit, that makes sense. Like it will put your worries to rest so quickly. And so I always like this topic because it's a perfectly reasonable thing to worry about. There are multi-billion and even a trillion dollar company that are entering this space that are competing for the same customers as you. That's a scary thing on the front. On the back, it's actually a really exciting thing because, and I can give you a bit of a history lesson here, we started teaching online training in 2013. We were the first people to teach it. And I can tell you that my job in 2013 was not to convince you to buy from me. My job was to convince you that online training was something that existed, that was legitimate, that customers would actually pay for, that anybody would pay for fitness online. That was my job, right? As somebody who was going to teach you how to become an online trainer and how to adopt online training into your practice. Well, now the market wants this. Proof positive. There are billion-dollar companies. There's a trillion-dollar company that this is important enough for them to make a big bet on and enter this space because there is so much consumer demand. Holy shit, that's exciting. Oh my God, that's exciting. Like that's huge. Amber, you've been around this for a number of years. Like, talk about the shift in just how much consumer activity there is in this space in the last couple of years.
I mean, I think we've seen it slowly happening, but with the pandemic, like we've just seen it kind of on steroids. For our fellow introverts who don't want to socialize much, this was a godsend, right? Like the idea of going to a class or going into a gym, I hate. I mean, that's why I have a gym at my house. I hate going out and working out around other people and having to socialize. I don't want to do that.
Right.
So it's been slowly happening, but now, I mean, one of the positives of COVID is that it made it much more acceptable and it forced people to experiment and be like, wow, like, this is actually really great.
And it's opened up the fitness world to so many new people who maybe didn't feel welcome in our gyms or the previous array of options, which was actually very narrow. You had to go to a facility. You had to go to a trainer's basement and do something, right? Even if it was a Curves or something like that, that was more welcoming, or like a Planet Fitness that was more welcoming and inclusive. Like, you still had to go somewhere in a public place and do something. Like, the amount of new options that have proliferated to expand the pie is really, really neat. There's all of these jokes. I always laugh. It's like the biggest winners out of the pandemic are introverts, dogs, and babies.
Hey, I have like all of those. So that
there you go. So you're crushing. And like, what can you imagine? Can you imagine a reverse pandemic where you weren't allowed to be inside, where you had to go out and be public?
I'm getting hives just thinking about it. Like, I actually had to be at a physical building to work now.
Yeah. So let's talk about, though, I mean, yes, it's one thing to say, oh, this is really exciting. There's a tremendous amount of new opportunities that are available because there's so much more consumer demand. And that's proven by the huge companies that are getting into the space, the proliferation of places like Peloton, right, that are just, I mean, steamrolling the market in a lot of ways. That's all well and good to say. It doesn't mean that, you know, you're rightfully, justifiably not a little bit nervous that, oh, is there going to be a place for little old me in this market? Mm-hmm. And there isn't if you play their game. And that's the lesson that I want to teach you today. There is no place for you if you play the same game as them. If you try to compete on more superficial things, if you try more mass marketing type stuff, if you go into paid advertising without really dialing in on the specifics of your offer and testing them, if you're doing things like you're trying to sell a whole lot of people a very low-end membership with streaming workouts, you're going to get your ass handed to you. And the reason for that is quite simple. There are companies that have huge budgets, that have groups of people who are very smart, been doing this for a very long time, with millions of dollars to spend, with some of the best instructors in the world, some of the best looking instructors in the world, which, as much as we hate to admit it, makes a difference with superficial streaming workouts. And they're simply better at marketing than you. They're better at marketing than me. They're better at marketing. I mean, that's, and even if they're not, they can afford to spend millions of dollars before they figure out what works. You can't. If you play their game, they will beat you. The trick, the secret to competing with Peloton, to all of these big fitness apps and companies like Apple Plus and those guys, is don't play their game. Play your own game. Play your own game. Play your own game where you are competing on what makes you uniquely you. Tighten up your market. Appeal to a smaller amount of people. Appeal to a group so small that it doesn't make sense for these big companies to target it. They simply can't. You could build a easy six-figure, even multi-seven-figure business by appealing to the smallest of small niche markets. I use the example when we talk about the 1% uniqueness factor in the Online Trainer Academy, which is where we really teach the ins and outs of how to do all of this stuff. I use the example of something as obscure as a trainer who works with mothers who have had C-sections who are stationed on military bases overseas. There are Facebook groups for expat mothers living on military bases. It is a huge market that nobody has tapped. And I don't understand why nobody has touched it, even though I've kept talking about it so much. But like that single market, it's like, well, who would you go to if you were looking for a service and you were in any way unique, in any way, shape, or form? Would you go to a general physician, or would you go to a surgeon who specializes in that thing? The same thing as people who buy a trainer, right? They go to a general physician if they don't know otherwise, if nobody has come to them that has shown that they are different and understand them better and are able to speak to them more specifically. Then they choose the general option. It's not that they're, everybody says, oh, these people are cheap. People aren't cheap. They buy expensive stuff all the time. That person who you says is too cheap or not willing to spend money on themselves for a $10 membership is the same person who has an $800 iPhone. It's not that they're not willing to spend money. It's that you have not given them reason to spend money on you. That's the difference. And that's kind of a hard truth. But that's the reality. And that's why I say don't play the same game as these large fitness conglomerates, as these large fitness apps like the Peloton people. Play your own game, build your own market, play your own field. That market that I told you about, mothers who have had C-sections that live on military bases overseas. How many clients do you need to build? $72,000 a year, you need 30 clients paying you $200 a month. You think there's 30 people like that? You think there's 50 people like that? You think there's 100 people like that? I'm willing to bet that there's thousands. How many people do you need?
I grew up in the military. I can guarantee you there's more than enough.
And you grew up in the military, and was it your dad?
My dad and stepdad are retired Marines, and my ex-husband was in the Army.
Did you grow up on bases? Like, did you move around to different bases?
Yep, every 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. And so everybody's exercising, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of downtime, particularly for spouses, right? These people make pretty good money and they have nowhere to spend it, right?
Military depends, but not our low-ranking guys. But they spend money. There's no question whether they should or not, but they spend money.
They spend money. But that's just one example. I mean, I don't, like, maybe this isn't the right example for you. Like, clearly, if you're going to go that direct with a market, like, you got to know that market. Like, you should probably be that market, too, if you're going to go that direct, particularly with something like with something there, you might want to know them a little bit more. But the bread and butter here is to really take the time to understand the game that you're playing and to understand where you sit and where you play and where you don't. And what that allows you to do is, A, look past the comparison game. It allows you to stop worrying. It doesn't matter what those other companies do. It's completely irrelevant. Doesn't straight up doesn't matter. It allows you to focus your efforts. It allows you to know exactly where to access these people. Where do they hang out? Are they in Facebook groups? Are they in LinkedIn? Do they use TikTok? What hashtags do they use? Right? The amount of times we hear in our groups, Amber, like, what's the best hashtag to attract new clients?
Yep.
I don't know. Who are your clients?
Yep.
Oh, people who want fat loss. You're going to have to do a little bit better than that.
Yep.
And when you do that, you know what type of content to create. You know what type of language to use. And all of a sudden, everything starts to fall into place. And you will find very quickly that you have to do much less work to get much more benefit. And you don't compete because it's scary. What did I say in the last episode? Right? The last episode, to end it, which I recommend you listen to because it kind of goes along with this one, is if what you're doing and how you're differentiating yourself doesn't scare you because it cuts you off from a large percentage of your potential clients, like 99.99% of your potential clients, then you're not differentiated and nobody has a reason to buy from you versus anybody else. And that one reason, that one thing is the single reason why most people aren't going to do what I'm going to say and why there's so much opportunity in it.
100%. We see it all the time, and I would take it a step further too, in that another big reason someone's going to choose to work with you is because you're a real human versus a company, and the customer service that comes with it, the intimacy that comes with it, which what we do is extremely personal. And having a real person to work with that understands us is very valuable. So, I mean, we've joked about this on the podcast before, like, this has given us an opportunity to kind of showcase our personalities a little bit more and kind of relax. Do the same thing. Lean into who you are. If you're, if you nerd out on Marvel comic books, cool, lean into it. It will pull the right people to you. A company can't really do that as well as you can. So not just super niche down, which absolutely, but also be super authentic and approachable, and people will want to work with you that way as well.
And it doesn't mean that you can't go big.
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean you can't go big. 100% you can go big.
Mm-hmm.
Think of, talk about Elon Musk. Right? Think about how weird and wacky he is and how much his personal brand, now he's not, differentiating necessarily, but his personal brand is what drives all of his enterprises. Mm-hmm. And that guy runs, $4 billion companies?
Yep. Which
is insane. I still think that he's an evil villain. Like, if you think about the archetype for an evil villain, right? He controls money. He was one of the founders of PayPal. Now he owns a bunch of Bitcoin, and he's doing stuff behind the scenes with cryptocurrencies. Yep. He controls energy. He's got Solar City. He's got satellites in the world that are going to be providing the world with internet pretty soon. So now he's going to have a direct internet link to everything you do. Cars. Mm-hmm. Basically, the only thing he doesn't have is phones.
I feel like he's like chaotic good. And then we have like Jeff Bezos, who's like chaotic evil.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because that's their public brand.
No, absolutely. But that's I would read that comic between Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos.
That'd be a good comic. That'd be a very good comic. There'd be a lot of ex-wives left in the wake.
Very rich ex-wives.
Be a lot of very rich ex-wives in the wake. I mean, you would argue, not so much in Musk's background, but you would argue in Bezos' background. I mean, Mackenzie Bezos is brilliant. She wasn't just a bystander. Like, she was the team. Mm-hmm. Like she was the MVP, right? And I think you're starting to see that now that they've split. Kind of what's going on. Anyway, it doesn't matter. This idea, I hope that this has helped you kind of make sense of how do you compete? Where do you put your flag in the sand? I mean, you're looking at all this stuff going out there and you're saying, well, how is there a place for little old me? And what I urge you to do is to appreciate that the fact that you're little old you is a massive competitive advantage. Mm. If you lean into it, but only if you lean into it. If you say what everybody says, how everybody else says it, there are always going to be people who are better looking than you, with more money than you, with more money and time to waste than you, and with more resources than you, that are going to kick your freaking butt in this business. But if you have the guts to set yourself apart in a way that is scary, because it feels like you are not going to be able to possibly have enough customers to make this thing work, because there can't possibly be this many people in the world. Well, you really don't need that many, number one. And number two, there are a lot of people in this world. And now with decentralization and communities that have been formed, you could find just about anybody who's interested in just about anything and integrate yourself into that community really, really easily. And become the only fitness person, literally the only operator in that business. You can become that person. But it takes guts. It's scary. So at the end of the day, it's up to you. You don't compete with them. You play your own game. And if you play your own game, it will be scary. You will feel like you're on your own. You will feel like you're doing something that could be cutting you off from opportunities, not recognizing that you are actually building more opportunities than ever. Because at the end of the day, if you start really narrow like this, you will expand outwards. And there are ample precedents for this. The book The Motion by Andy Weir is one of the most famous ones. That book was written online for astrophysicist nerds for free, chapter by chapter. Nobody ever thought in a million years that this thing was going to get mass global acceptance. It started with that one group, very, very small. And then other people found it and they were like, this is pretty cool. And then they made it theirs. Right? And that's what will happen. So I urge you, go out on a limb. Do the scary thing. Most people won't. That's why it has such a big advantage.
Great. I love it. Thanks for tuning in to another episode with us. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Leave us a review, please. And we will catch you on the next episode.
Bye-bye.